I'm wondering if you can talk about what writing about the present entails and why that's important to you, especially now.
Matt, you go first.
The Historian's Eye project started out of the poignance of that moment right after the Obama election and in between the Obama election and the first Obama inauguration, when, in quotes here, this historical moment was just on everybody's lips. Everyone was talking about this historical moment and obsessing on it and reflecting on it in a way that was quite unusual for a culture that really is pretty ahistorical and amnesiac. So I was interested in that. And I was interested in the question of whether the camera can be a historian's instrument. Can you go out in the world with a camera and do historical work with it? Where I ended up, and the answer to that question, I mean, I could probably argue it either way, and we can talk about that. But the more important thing that came out of that for me was that the camera taught me to think about the present in a different way in relationship to history. So for me, working in the present, since I'm a historian, writing about the present is always about finding new ways to write historically. And what changed me about the project with camera in hand was that we tend to think, and I think we're taught to think, that history is linear for one thing, and it's behind us. It's either we've left it behind and it's distant. And what the camera was teaching me was that that is not the case at all, that history is actually, it's more like the geological formation that we're standing on, and that it surrounds us, and that history is what the present is made of. So the trick for me was to think historically about the present, and that is just a very different exercise than knowing history. Knowing history is still necessary. That's kind of the part A. But the part B of thinking historically about the present is kind of jarring loose the idea that the point is to kind of narrate our way through the 20th century, and rather it's to see those historical traces everywhere we look, and to figure out how to interpret them and how to understand them and how to see them and how to see how they're shaping our present, to see how the history is delivering us to the moment that we're in. And I think, you know, for the specifics of the Obama moment, I mean, one of the things that I learned over the course of that project, and I think it's clear as day in the book, even though every word of that book except the afterword was written before the 2016 election, I think that that's a study in the rise of Trumpism. I mean, even before Trump came down the escalator, and you could just see it. And I think that, to me, that was kind of the significance of that project, was understanding how to read the present and how to think historically about it. And that's totally left a mark on my teaching. I'll never teach history the same way again. I think I'll always stay with that idea that our students don't need to narrate the 1920s, but they do need to understand the traces that the 1920s have left with us and are still shaping, you know, a city like New Haven, right? Let's talk about the Great Migration and how important that is. So it's thinking historically, but it's just in a different register than I had done for the first 20 years of my career.
But Ami, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Well, first of all, Leah, thank you so much for your labor in the literary commons, as it were. I have to say thank you, Matt, for teaching passport photos. And the great Lisa Lowe, I think, is right now in the audience listening to us too. So on the West Coast, Lisa Lowe, and on the East Coast, Matt Jacobson. Now she's at Yale, I know, but because of their teaching passport photos, I think I'll be able to send my children to college. So thank you for that. It's very good. Now about the present, you know, can I, because we are also discussing the academy, one thing I want to just sort of mention from this book that you were kind enough to mention, Leah, Every Day I Write the Book, there's a 2 to 3 page thing on journals, you know, and it starts with some journal saying to a contributor, sending a letter to the contributor. And it says, in an effort to speed up publication, dear blah, 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 in an effort to speed up the publication schedule and work through a backlog, we are attempting to collect any remaining permissions from authors. And it goes on in that way. And it then says to this writer, please return these permissions. Cool? And then I cite the contributor's letter to the journal. It says, dear journal of blah, blah. Thank you so much for your note. I was very grateful when you accepted my article for publication in your journal 7 years ago. Since that time, approximately 5 years ago, you forgot that you have accepted the article and resent it through your review process, after which you sent me a rejection letter based on the insane rants of an inflamed tea partier. Anachronistic, I know, and it goes on. A year later, you sent me a letter similar to the one above. I'm reading this out in order to say to you, because you asked us about the present, and I understand the context in which you're asking, but I just want to say, we sometimes live in a hellish eternal present of the academy. Time doesn't weigh on us in the same way. We might in cocktail conversations or in corridors talk about it, and maybe it happens in history departments, but the pressure of the present in our practices, in the way we conduct business in our departments, the way people will talk, at least at my institution, about who we should hire or what, is never, for me, ever in the living moment of the present. It is often refers back to 20 years before, 10 years before. And this exchange between a contributor and the journal is a particularly egregious example for me of how the academy conducts its business. Does that make sense to you? Kind of, Leah? But let me address the question that you might have in mind when you said writing about the present. You know, in this book, one of the examples or models I hold up is Claudia Rankine, Citizen, okay? Because you asked the question about the cross genre, I'm very much struck by the fact that Rankine's book was nominated for an award at I think it was the National Book Critics Circle, both in the poetry section and in the criticism section. I mean, that's hashtag goals. You know what I'm saying? I mean, to have these two different categories, that's what we should be going for. And the reason why I'm choosing her to talk about the present is because if you open her book and read, for example, that lovely, lovely and tragic line, because white men can't police their imagination, black men are dying, you find near it that the book will say, in memory of, and it lists names that have now become a part of the American mainstream. Eric Garner, for example, Michael Brown. And on my edition, it has 4 names or 5 names. On my students' editions, tragically again, it has 8 names. I want to applaud the fact that Claudia Rankine has written a book that offers testimony in its different editions to the changing present, the more and more horrible realities. So I am applauding both the idea of how it is a cross-genre book, but also how it is situated in the present or answers a need of the present in a way that addresses, testifies to how things change and how even the list of the people killed has been, alas, increasing every day.